And thank you very much for joining us here on PM Express. And tonight, as you may know, there's a lot happening in this country, bordering primarily on the debt exchange crisis, but also anchored around the current economic crisis and our desire to get an IMF executive board approval. Now, because of that, there is a lot of conversation around what Parliament itself is allowed to do, especially because of the current unique nature of the crisis that the country faces. Last 2 weeks, when the individual bondholders went to Parliament, they consulted with the leadership, and we heard from Evans Mensah. This week, we want to hear from the leader of the minority side in Parliament on a whole host of issues that Parliament will have to deal with going forward. There's a school of thought that says the current election program must come to Parliament for approval. Is that really what it is? We'll get into that. And what role really can Parliament play in this very crucial time? Thankfully, Parliament is resuming in the next couple of weeks, and so they would really be in the thick of affairs once they resume. Because the debt exchange program, as you know, the domestic debt exchange program expires on the 31st. A week after that, Parliament resumes. And what the minority does will be very critical to our success or otherwise of the debt exchange program. And that's why tonight we brought into the studio the minority leader, Haruna Idrisu, who is going to sit with me for an interview, a conversation on all the key issues around the debt exchange program. And today we've seen the Auditor General's own report on the expenditure around the COVID-19. This is something that the minority had been talking about for quite some time. We'll talk quite about Parliament itself and what we can expect as it resumes. Stay with me. After this break, Haruna Idrisu is my guest. As I indicated, in the studio with me tonight is the minority leader, Haruna Idrisu. Mr. Idrisu, thank you very much again for joining us on PM Express.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And
Evans.
Happy New Year.
Let me use the opportunity to express same to your esteemed listeners and to the staff and management of Joy FM for your enormous contribution to deepening accountability in our country and holding all of us accountable to our word and to the honor of wanting to serve the Republic. So my pleasure to be here, Evans.
Great. Let's start from your domain, which is Parliament. Parliament resumes from the 7th of February.
Yeah, I spoke to the Speaker this morning, and I spoke to the clerk last night, who was on his way to a human rights forum, as I understand, and it was a wish of the leadership and that of Mr. Speaker that Parliament resumes even tomorrow, 24th. Subsequently, there was discussion as to 31st, but I understand that the Speaker will soon issue the warrant calling Parliament, which is more likely to be 7th February.
Why the agency? Why the agency for tomorrow?
No, it's not the agency. Normally, Parliament, when we go on these holidays, we come back before the end of January. That has been the tradition and the practice. And don't forget that this is the session which will usher the President come in to do the State of the Nation address. For me, this time around, President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo has lost his balance as leader of our great country. He's squandered massive goodwill and an opportunity to govern well. He's thrown all the governance ethos to the dogs and just saying that Mayokra Maye. I mean, you know, so governance is now like, I have the mandate, and therefore he doesn't even respect public opinion. He doesn't respect the discourse that goes on. Parliament has an onerous responsibility to keep the stability of our country and to deepen and contribute to our democratic governance. I'm not one of those who think that Parliament since 1993 have lived up to that particular calling. Other than that, you'll be asking that how did Ghana get into a debt crisis? How did Ghana get into an economic crisis?
You think Parliament is culpable in that?
I should think so, that Parliament has not waxed its influence and have not lived to its mandate within the limitations of the checks and balances guaranteed under the 1992 Constitution. Parliament has become an appendage to the executive, and as I've always noted, a clearinghouse for executive embarrassment. Other than that, and I'm sure I understand that some of those voices you may have to play it, because there are those who are still critical of us as a minority, unjustifiably. I mean, you recall that even when Parliament was going to resume sitting, I highlighted that we may have to take a position as Parliament to limit borrowing by government. It meant that we anticipated a crisis with excessive and irresponsible borrowing by Nana Addo Dankwa and his administration. Now, why would you be discussing matters of debt exchange? Why would you be involving bondholders? It's never ever happened in our country's history that we manage an economy so badly, a horrendous mismanagement, that you get to a state where you have to be putting your hands in people's pockets and say that individual bondholders and people who are holding money, whether they are insurance or bankers, should contribute a 137 billion into managing to improve the debt sustainability of our country. It never ever happened. So I want to believe that President Nana Addo Dankwa, as I've stated, have lost their ballast as leader of our country.
I'm curious to say that about Parliament, considering that for the very first time you have a hang Parliament. So everybody was thinking this is the time when Parliament's real might and its role in the checks and balances will be more felt.
We've tried. Those who are fairer in their judgment will credit this minority at least with some modicum of successes. I mean, for instance, just observe what has happened today. How could any government fight even an opposition call for a probe and an investigation and audit into COVID resources? You saw what we went through when I moved the motion for accountability of COVID. Remember, I kept saying that this was a request made to me from donors who wanted to see the Republic of Ghana, the president and his ministers and institutions account for the utilization of COVID resources. You saw what the majority did. They didn't support it. Initially, the motion was even dismissed by the first deputy speaker. We had to come back forcefully to get the parliamentary committee until subsequently the Auditor General, I presided over the audit, the budget of the audit service at the special budget. And I kept asking him, have you read excerpts of the media review of the budget? There's a provision that you are to audit COVID. Then he assured me that he was almost done with the COVID audit, and quite revealing and instructive. $81 million money paid into UNICEF account for drugs not supplied 23 years on. You've seen over-invoicing from some state institutions. You've seen the Ministry of Health not able to account for monies allocated to them in the name of emergency procurements. So we were right as a minority when we said that COVID was a loot and share opportunity for government, particularly in the 2020.
But the auditor didn't find that though, that it was loot and share.
And maybe you give $81 million to somebody and doesn't supply the medicine. What does that mean?
Well, the Ghana Health Service
is a loot to be lost.
Explains that it's because you don't have enough storage, cold storage for the vaccines.
3 years on,
that's why it has not come.
If this had not come, the people of Ghana would not even know that $81 million have been paid. You've seen them rent premises, lease properties, pay 15, 30 million Ghana cedis.
In Adaklu.
In Adaklu. How much that is the worth of a home there? And you pay this quantum of money in the name of COVID that is not even being utilized. So wasteful expenditure. And yet you find President Nana Addo Dankwa and the Minister of Finance trying to justify that Ukraine and COVID. So for COVID, we are now being told that out of 21 billion, 10 billion went into budget support. So at least COVID was even helpful to this administration in terms of the resources that they mobilized, either from the World Bank or from the IMF or from the contingency fund. They got substantial amount of resources for budget support. Only 11 billion of the 21 billion was used for purpose of COVID. And even that, they are struggling to account for it. I should think that we all should commend the Auditor General for the revelations in the report of COVID. The majority should be ashamed for not even wanting sunshine on the loot that was associated with COVID resources. You heard the tape recording of one parliamentary candidate in Sanarwe in the northern region, Felicia, when she said publicly that this is how COVID resources were shared to them as parliamentary.
But there's no evidence yet to back that.
No, but
Auditor General didn't pick up on that.
Her comment is evidence itself. I don't know what evidence you are looking for.
But at least if it's been audited, you will find evidence to corroborate otherwise.
So if you find somebody received 15 million for lease agreement and he shares that money to party supporters, you understand where it came from. Undeserving. I think your focus should be whether persons who receive these COVID resources deserve them or not. But at least you should give credit to the minority that stood tall and demanded accountability with the utilization of COVID resources. You took money from our contingency fund, $280 million US. Today you are running to the IMF asking for $3 billion US. You got $2 billion from COVID. What did you do with it?
Well, I mean,
the World Bank initially gave you $1 billion.
The government
later on, you got $380 million US from the World Bank.
Yes.
You got additional resources even from Korea that even the Auditor General
hasn't. Yes, that's true. The Auditor
General
hasn't audited.
And I think you should throw lights on it. Yeah. No, it means not even all the resources dedicated to COVID.
So for those who don't know that, my research desk did the work on it. The Auditor General only audited 6 sources.
Yep.
But there are a total of 9 sources that the Finance Minister put before Parliament.
Absolutely.
So 3 of them haven't been audited yet. And that begs the question, Mr. Idrisu. Today, your ranking member on the Health Committee confirmed to us that when Parliament resumes, they will do a public hearing of that committee into this. Is this something that you plan to interrogate beyond what the Auditor General had put forth?
No, I'm surprised that even the committee has not commenced its proceedings.
They haven't.
And again, frustration from within government and from within the majority.
How? But this is the domain of Parliament.
No, yes, they have met a number of times to agree on the rules. Remember that we work within our standing orders and the rules. The Ghanaian public expected to have heard them long ago, but at least the revelations of the Auditor General provide new impetus for them to probe further and to call those institutions that the Auditor General have named to come forward and account for it. I mean, very, very, Evans, if you read the Auditor General report, 81 million just in vaccines, just sitting there in UNICEF, somebody have to speak for them to say that, okay, because you didn't have cold store, some of the, you saw 15.2 million Ghana cedis being paid as financing for a lease agreement. The Ministry of Finance itself even releases to Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We see a figure here less than what came to Parliament. I mean, our Foreign Affairs Committee discovered that 65 million was spent on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs by the Ministry of Finance. That is also not what the Auditor General is revealing here. So it means that the audit committee that the Speaker of Parliament, Honorable Bagbin, approved to probe COVID will have to go deeper
into this. But at the end of the day,
make sure that the state gets value for money.
Yes, exactly. But that's
the loot in the name of
That's the question that I'm coming to. I remember the last time Parliament formed a similar committee, similar to COVID affairs, when you looked into the Minister of Health. We still don't know what has come of that, the recommendation. That minister hasn't been sanctioned. Question is, Parliament will go into this, but then what will come out of the process at the end of the day?
Those are the failures of President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo.
Why him? This is Parliament.
You have a minister
for independent government arm.
Who admits that I paid money for Sputnik. They were not supplied. I didn't go through proper procurement. He must be home. But the person to send him home is President Nana Addo Dankwa.
I mean,
look at 10.3 million of those they said was in the name of health insurance. The number of health workers are not known. The beneficiary list is not provided. You just give another loot money of 10 million in the name of insurance. Look at those who benefited. You have Enterprise Life Assurance Company Limited and the rest, and you have 10.3 million. And under a pandemic was novel to the industry and therefore not accounted for. I can get your own frustration and disappointment in Parliament not living up to what I've said is calling an expectation in holding the executive, in particular the president and ministers and other institutions accountable. That I agree perfectly with you. But we need to work together.
But I need to ask you, because this committee is going to start its work and it's a public hearing, thankfully we can monitor. What do you expect at the end of that process?
They would have come down for us to know how much of this money went into waste and how much of it can be recovered.
So, but that's the question. Once we know, then what about the individuals who dissipated these funds?
I'm sure there will be recommendations for sanctions. I mean, you can read Article 187, 6 and 7 very well. Parliament ought to set a committee which will look at post-public accounts committee report. And I've argued strongly that we should get a former jurist to chair that committee so that we can apply weightier sanctions. I mean, what corruption hates is exposure and risks, and we should hold persons accountable to these infractions of the law, infractions of our financial system.
You took a historical step in pushing for the vote of censure against the finance minister.
Yes, yes.
Will you do same in this instance when you have ministers who have been found culpable?
Evans, even with the vote of censure, I don't have it easy. There are people within the NDC and outside the NDC who say, and the minority failed. The question I ask, failed to do what? Article 82 imposes an onerous burden on whoever is moving the motion that you must have 2/3 majority. I'm well aware that the Ghanaian people didn't give NDC other than 137 seats. Currently probably with 136 because one is not able to participate actively and fully as he should, the member for Asin North in our deliberations. Now, in moving the motion, I was convinced that given the public posture and public pronouncements of our colleagues opposite the aisle, they will support me with some 47, 67 votes so that I could seal and get a 2/3 majority. You saw them walk out and boycott it, just as they did to COVID. So if they love this country, they would not have boycotted a COVID probe. If they love this country, they would not have boycotted a censorship motion of a minister that they themselves accept publicly and in their hearts that is a failure and has become a liability to the President of the Republic. I mean, why would anybody want to keep Ken Ofori-Atta as Minister for Finance? You know, he doesn't inspire confidence in the investor community again. You've seen him take unilateral decisions that he does not even have the mandate and authority to do. I know we'll cruise towards debt exchange. Yes. First of all, when did you hear of a debt exchange? No consultation with investors, no consultation with individual bondholders. He announced it tersely, one-line paragraph.
We'll come to that as a major topic of conversation.
But Evans, even before we get to the main conversation, what mandate does he have as Minister of Finance to revoke and vary a decision approved by Parliament, which is the terms and conditions of a loan agreement?
Okay, but so let's go to that. I think you've touched on it. Explain that point. I think you introduced this very interesting part of this conversation nobody has touched on. It's just a constitutional point you're making.
Yes.
That this whole debt exchange program, actually, there's a constitutional issue there that has been missed.
In my view, and the legal experts should help us, President Nana Addo Dankwa and Ken Ofori-Atta are engaged in an unacceptable act of expropriation. Legitimately, you've invested your money. You are entitled to the interest on your investment. Whether interest plus principal or interest and principal is yours. If the state decides to take it, that is an act of expropriation, and the Constitution frowns upon it. Now, 2, Article 1814 says that Parliament shall, by a resolution approved by a simple majority, the terms and conditions of a loan agreement. So if you took money from a bilateral creditor, whether it's China that we owe 2.6 billion or Paris Club that we owe 2.1 billion, you entered into a certain terms and conditions. Ken Ofori-Atta is now varying the terms as an individual and as Minister for Finance, my argument is that he doesn't have the authority and mandate.
Who does?
So. I should think that he has to come back to Parliament under Article 181, 1 and 5 of the Constitution. He's engaged in varying the terms and conditions of a loan. When Parliament approved the loan, it probably provided for tenor, it provided for a moratorium, it provided that interest and principal shall be paid within a certain period of 5 years. Now you are saying you are issuing 12 bonds and that 2023 zero coupon. Now he says for banks 5%. You say that is satisfactory. Now you say 2027 into 2038, you are varying the terms and conditions of an agreement that the sovereign, the Parliament of Ghana, I'm not saying Ghana's Parliament is sovereign, but at least Parliament.
But were those bonds subject to parliamentary approval?
Yes.
They were?
Yes. He came to Parliament and said, give me a mandate to borrow 3 billion. So what we even need to do, that's what I'm saying, the Parliament must position is well. The PSB, public sector borrowing of these treasury bills, must all now necessarily come back to Parliament. Maybe we've given him too much latitude. And he's now, in my view, pardon it, he's now walking around as if every authority in this country is vested in him as Minister of Finance. I'm sorry that is not the case. He can run riot on President Nana Addo Dankwa because he doesn't have the wit and will to reshuffle him, but he cannot do that to the Republic of Ghana. Now take individual bonds. You have your money. You had reached some terms and agreement with your bankers. That is contractual. The sacredness of a contractual obligation is being hampered and destroyed by Ken Ofori-Atta with this his attitude of take it or leave it attitude. You can't tell individual. The money is not your money. And people have toiled with their income. I hear them assuring pensioners that a certain category of them will get exemption. I hear the armed forces have been assured that they will not be affected. I'm not too sure about the Ghana Police Service, and I'm not too sure about the Ghana Immigration Service. So the security agencies themselves must open up and be assured that pensions. And then, Evans, when we come to the reality of it, I'll come back to the horrendous mismanagement of the economy. Take, for instance, SNIT. And maybe probably none of us have analyzed SNIT well. SNIT have invested in banks with the hope that they earn dividends from those banks' profitability in order to pay pensions. So if you disenable them by way of disenabling the financial stability and the financial system of Ghana, SNIT is not likely to be able to pay pensioners because the dividends they expect, which is what they will use to pay pensioners, will not be
forthcoming. But that's a stand they've exempted the pension fund.
No, and I'm saying investment
indirectly,
of SNIT.
if they don't prepare.
Investment of SNIT. Where has SNIT invested in? And then when the financial institutions publish their annual account, we then will be interested in knowing interest on income. How much did they earn? I understand perfectly that the banks themselves want to contribute to easing government's burden.
They've struck an agreement.
No, even that agreement is not conclusive.
Why?
And Evan,
a statement has been issued, a joint statement that says that both sides are now agreed.
That is not
subject to shareholders' approval.
And I say that is not enough. So go and get shareholders' approval. 2, the only useful agreement I find in today's consultation between the Minister of Finance and the bank is again unilateralism. When the minister said that he shall have the power to vary the terms without coming back.
Has been reversed.
That has been reversed. That's positive. But you see, Evans, you are telling the banks that I'm going to IMF for 3 billion for a 3-year period. Then you want them to buy into your debt exchange, whether internal or external, for 15 years. There's a problem with it. You are saying the economy will recover and the economy improve in 3 years. Why are you extending whatever discussions you are having with banks to 10, 15 years and individual bond holders? It means there is something amiss. Because the IMF program...
The sustainability analysis shows that it will take at least 15 years for this economy to rebound.
Yet, even not just the rebound, government needs about 10.6 billion US dollars to get out of this crisis. It probably will get some 3 billion from the IMF, 1 billion from bilateral institutions. it is expected to get 4.6 billion from commercial creditors. And get it right, Evans. Part of the lack of openness and the opaqueness of Minister of Finance Ken Ofori-Atta is the fact that his bilateral creditors, Paris Club, he owes them only 2.1 billion, maybe China 2.6 billion. A lot of it is with commercial creditors. Sure. And they are waiting for comparative analysis as what he would do to domestic bondholders, then they will demand fairness when he's dealing with them. So how is Ghana going to raise 4.6 billion from those commercial creditors? You think that they will give you debt release up to that amount, even if you got 3 billion from the IMF, 1 billion, because your exposure is 10.6 billion US dollars.
I'm
so
interested.
He must come clear.
I'm interested in that constitutional question. So are you saying that you expect the finance minister, once they reach these agreements and principles with banks, with individuals, etc., to return to Parliament for ratification, for approval?
I thought he should have even done that before engaging bondholders and external creditors.
As in, get parliamentary...
Yes. He has not been...
clearance to go and negotiate?
He has not been responsible in reporting to Parliament. I said in the 2023...
No, but in the budget, he told you in the 2023 budget that he'll be doing a debt exchange. And you approved the budget.
No parameters or details of the debt exchange was provided to Parliament.
Yeah, but he hadn't negotiated anything yet.
He did that on the street. But at least tell us that domestic bond, you're going to issue 12 bonds as is now been announced. That is not what he said. He said 2023 0, then 5% into the future to 2027 to 2038. The external, he still, what's his engagement with the external creditors?
Not yet. I mean, we don't know clarity on that yet.
But like it or not, we are elevating it to a legal constitutional matter that the Minister for Finance is seeking unilaterally to vary the terms of conditions so approved by Parliament for which he has...
So what's the consequence of that? What's the consequence?
He will be held responsible for breach of law and breach of the Constitution.
But you expect him to post the agreement in principle come back?
No, he must come back. He ought even to have prior. He should have engaged
I mentioned that again.
More earlier.
I thought he did that in the 2023 budget.
Just one line sentence.
Yes.
There will be debt operation.
Yes.
It's not enough.
But you approve that at least.
No. So that's why even as minority, we detailed out a few issues we're not in agreement with, and it included that exchange. We said no. For instance, value-added tax, 2.5%. We said no. It was immoral for us to support VAT at 2.5% when the same Nana Addo Dankwa led persons of up to 6 people to die because he didn't believe in the principle of VAT. VAT was introduced by the NDC in 1993, subsequent in 1996. VAT now brings in 15 billion Ghana cedis. So at least there's some weight and wisdom in the NDC, and we have brains who can work. Today he's appreciated that he can live with VAT resources and want to adjust it up. And our argument was that if you take Africa, where compared to 2 or 3 other countries, which VAT threshold is almost 21%, because stop the pretense that NHIL levy is VAT. That 2.5% is VAT. Get Fund, 2.5% is VAT. Even originally what went to Ghana Infrastructure Fund was VAT. So cumulatively, Ghanaians are made to pay more VAT than any other country in West Africa. But our fundamental objection was the morality of it. It's like ESLA. Nana Addo Dankwa said nuisance tax. Yet he comes to borrow against ESLA for over 10 years. Where will he be president of Ghana into 2020?
Final one on this, but you give me clarity on, you said because of what you believe is the constitutional breach, you must be held accountable and responsible, and the consequence. Specify the consequence for me. What is it going to be for the finance minister?
We have to look at his oath and what it means when he's in breach of his constitutional...
I mean, you've already tried a vote of censure and lost on this.
Vote of censure...
So this, I guess, is out of the way.
No. Vote of censure, as I said, essentially, I couldn't have won because I didn't have the number.
Yes.
I expected cooperation in the national interest.
On this claimed breach, there'll be no consequence, although you believe there should be.
They won't rule forever. And infractions of law persons will be held accountable to.
Are you suggesting that if you win power in 2024, you might revisit this?
The NDC will win 2024, inshallah. It looks, the prospects looks much more optimistic.
Are you serving notice to Ken Ofori-Atta that you hold him legally responsible?
Vengeance is not for the NDC and for its leader, but I'm saying that fidelity and respect to the letter and spirit of the law is important, particularly with constitutional provisions. And don't forget, some of the external creditors may demand that he comes to Parliament, because for them to cede and accept what he is doing, they must have the buy-in that the sovereign will pay them the money back appropriately.
Yeah, but you raise a very important point. If you win in 2024, in 2025, this will be something that you would have to, in essence, execute the bulk, inherit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So is this something that you are committed to respecting if you win?
He must account to the Ghanaian public through the elected representative, and that's the Parliament of Ghana. And we are not satisfied so far with his report on debt exchange as he's done.
Creditors listening to you right now will get a bit jittery, because you are a government in waiting.
And they must be jittery.
And if you're suggesting that if things aren't done right now and you win, there could be repercussions for the agreement that Ken Ofori-Atta is signing right now for the future.
So we are saying that, can Ken Ofori-Atta Somoto as an individual bind the Republic? My answer is no. It is only the sovereign Parliament of Ghana. And I'm not saying that our Parliament is sovereign compared to Westminster or the UK, but the mandate to approve such terms and conditions is vested in Parliament and not the Minister for Finance. And therefore, any such variation, he must seek the prior approval of Parliament or subsequent ratification of Parliament of those decisions. Why do you think that he went for an Attorney General opinion on the matter? Because initially he wanted to impose it. In a democracy, you want to put your hand in people's pockets, then you don't want their consent and authorization. So there are issues, and I think that we probably will.
Finally, on this.
He himself says that Ghana's bilateral creditors constitute about just 17% of the bulk of the 39 billion US dollars that we owe. And Evans, again, who wants to keep a Minister for Finance, President John Dramani Mahama, as he then was, for Eurobonds, borrowed 3.5 billion max. This one has borrowed 11 billion. So people should stop questioning, how did we get here? We got there as a result of reckless, irresponsible borrowing, which has not been invested in productive sectors of the economy, largely used for consumption and for purposes like the COVID wasteful.
But we have a situation where we are locked out of the market to come borrow. The Eurobond has been our savior for quite some time. We have a situation now that because of the current circumstances, the Eurobond markets are closed. What do you think the implications of that will be for us? But remember that the government had said, this is not their fault. This is the pandemic and Ukraine. So blaming them, they believe it's just being like an ostrich and burying your head in the sun. But that's where we are currently. We have no other means to borrow than to do this debt exchange.
We didn't borrow to support the war in Ukraine. And I want to believe that today you've read the African Development Bank report that Ghana's sovereign bonds were already junk even before 2021. That has been published, official, as coming from the African Development Bank, which was published. I read it only yesterday and today. So it cannot be COVID. And I'm saying that even the Auditor General report on COVID reveals that COVID helped this government, one, with budget support of up to 10 billion Ghana cedis. They only spent 11 of the 21 billion on COVID, the other one for budget support. How much they got from COVID? They are not likely to get that free money from the IMF. The IMF money will now come in for balance of payment support to keep our foreign reserves of imports high, which is currently below 1 month of import cover. Very worrying national security threat. I mean, I respect Bryce Simon when I read when he appeared at Newsfile and stated that Ghana is not yet in a full-blown economic crisis.
Like Sri Lanka.
But I like the nomenclature and his choice of words. From an economic crisis, you are likely to have a national security crisis. And therefore, this government must come clear that to raise 10.6 billion, 3 plus 1, that's 4. The $4.6 billion which will come from commercial creditors. I don't see it happen. And we are saying that engage properly. For instance, like the banks. How can a bank borrow what they call their financial stability liquidity fund?
Yes.
Who is going to assess it? And are they not going to borrow again for that purpose? They expect the World Bank.
Yeah, they expect
it's not going to be free money.
Yeah.
So you are borrowing to set up a liquidity fund. Now, one of the major concerns of the banks, which I have not seen in the memorandum they've signed, is the accounting treatment, this debt exchange, and what goes into it. There are minimum international financial standards. How will it be treated? We have been told that about 5 or more banks may collapse. Liquidity will become a problem. They may not be able to meet their minimum capital threshold. Employees will go home. The banks have said that we are not even concerned about profitability, but keep the stability of the financial system. It's positive hearing that at least on 2 or 3 matters they've agreed. Banks cannot have assets at 8%. Then you want to give them money and charge 27%. It makes no economic sense. When it's 8% on their assets and you are saying that I'm going to charge you 27%. Again, you are saying IMF program is for 3 years, yet your bonds and securities is for 12, 15 years. How are they going to cope within this particular period? I've heard some of them say that maybe you have to establish another sinking fund to buy some of this debt out. And I think that not just the banks, even insurance company. And Evans, it's important that we interrogate some of our laws and to understand our laws provide that banks, insurance companies, and others shall invest in government securities of up to 75%.
Yeah.
So it was not a mistaken judgment or a momentary lapse of judgment for them to buy government securities. That is what the law provided for. Now you are punishing them for investing in government bonds. That's what they are going through. Those punitive measures without consultation is not healthy for the financial stability of.
So the minorities oppose the debt exchange program. What is your alternative?
When you say alternative, we would not have borrowed recklessly and irresponsibly. I mean, we left a debt they describe as colossal, 120 billion. Today is 467 billion, which has exceeded close to 78% of GDP. When you add SOE debt, I'm told that Ghana's debt to GDP even exceeds 110%. But I'll go with a World Bank number of 104% of GDP. How could we get there? So when you say alternative, the NDC credible alternative is that we would not have borrowed so irresponsibly. I mean, remember, and maybe many Ghanaians have not appreciated it, Excellency John Dramani and the NDC in 2016 spent within budget, even in an election year. Go and check. We spent less than what was approved.
Because you had the IMF over your
head.
It
doesn't matter. They came and demonized IMF. Now the intestines are being turned for us to know what is inside it, and they are worried. They demonized IMF. What is wrong going to IMF? Is Ghana not a member of the IMF? Didn't the MPP go to IMF under President Kufuor? They did. But they demonized the IMF. You heard the IMF saying that they don't see anything wrong with our policy. There's everything wrong with our borrowing policy, which borrowing was excessive and the money not directed into productive sectors of the economy, but to consumption. And then look at the bonds they issued, even COVID. You issued COVID bonds. We are now defaulting. So, Evans, the true state of Ghana, you know, when President Nana Addo Dankwa appears before Parliament, we expect him to come and present the sorry state of the union to us, a disappointing state of our economy. You can liken the Ghanaian economy today and the rule of President Nana Addo Dankwa to a blind man in a dark room, no door, no windows, and he's being asked to walk out. How do we walk out of this crisis? If I were President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, I will engage.
Yeah, but
I will call the political echelons of this country to engage in order that we will all bring ideas on board. Must it be
such as you did in Sanctuary? Is that what you're proposing?
Absolutely. I was a member of the IMF negotiating team that President Mahama put together. Now, again, you just hear Ken Oforiatta. Where are the other members and representatives?
But is the NDC side willing to sit around the table with the government to talk about the crisis?
If we pick the phone and call our leader, why not? Either the party chairman or the flag bearer or both of them, and say that where we have reached, we need to build a national consensus. Probably we all should think of a one-off activity of a tax that takes all of us off this burden, including the banks and insurance companies whose life and sustainability is being...
Economic crisis levy.
Probably, probably, a brilliant one. You have to, because I don't see it, like I said, like a blind man being locked up in a room dark, no window, no door, and they say walk out of it. How is he going to walk?
But most substantively, you're saying that the NDC and the minority, you're not opposed to helping.
Absolutely.
If you are called to the table.
Evans, we have always helped them. And then again, as I said, you may not want to see even merit in the minority. Why? When they brought Sino-Hydro, $648 million, they kept arguing that they will pay with bauxite. Even the road to the construction side of the bauxite have not been done. Reality check. Now you have to pay for Sino-Hydro. Where is the bauxite? Where is the road to the bauxite? But you told the Chinese that you would be able to pay for Sino-Hydro better. The minority cautioned against it. We said, why are you bringing this agreement, no value for money? Give us time to scrutinize it. They said no. They said we have a mandate. And I think it's important, Evans, I established today, that much of the borrowing happened in the 7th Parliament when we had only 106 and they had 169. Those days, they could even arrogantly tell us that you can walk out. We don't need you. And kept borrowing. So check, much of the borrowing of the 467 billion happened when they had the comfortable majority in Parliament. At least the hung Parliament, absolutely, the hung Parliament has been very useful. We've been able to block a number of loans. We have even indicated to them that some loans that they bring, we won't participate in it. Remember, before the 750 million US dollars was approved, they wanted $1 billion. It took the minority to say no. We won't allow you to borrow $1 billion. The 250 was, if you remember, the insurance premium was expensive, almost 50 million US dollars for borrowing 250 million. It took the majority. Look at the scandalous Ajapa they brought. It took the minority to say no. So at least for our purposes, the hung Parliament have served the country somehow in a manner which is positive and favorable, that at least Parliament is being heard and Parliament is being respected. Take the politics of a cathedral. I've been very, very cautious because of my own religious background not to comment on it. But the expose that the Honorable Ablako and the minority have put on it. First of all, Evans, when did government approve a policy for a cathedral? How much will it cost to build the cathedral?
Well, but the budget...
Will all the resources come from the state? No. It was an afterthought. We were told initially that government will provide just seed money. That's not the case. We have now been told that millions of Ghana cedis are being spent.
It's seed money.
So there's no limit to seed money. I didn't know that.
Yeah, but they didn't specify the quantum of the seed money.
I thought seed money was one of respectable amount. You see, again, go back to the records of Parliament. I said, build the house of God with honor and with good money. I saw this coming.
You think this is not being built with honor?
What's the respect with the kind of debate that is going on? And can that be a national priority? And should that be a national priority? At least there is anyway. So we think that, as I've indicated, President Nana Addo Dankwa is the most disappointing president under the Fourth Republic. You say the president is going to come with a State of the Nation address. You've had your own term for it, but if it comes in March and the hope is that they get the executive board approval, that lays a clear path to recovery, and he can present a positive news. And you think that this economy will recover? No. You see, Evans. Sometimes, they speak to us as if when we're in Kulukulu school, then they give you, primary school. and they buy sweet bar for you not to get to class in order to understand what is being taught. By the president's own words, he says that debt to GDP will improve in 2028 to a sustainable level of 55%. This economy will not recover in 3 years. It's not possible. There's no magic. They don't have it. And they don't have the wisdom.
But the IMF program lays the path towards recovery.
No. Is it not the same IMF they said they didn't have faith in? How all of a sudden that the same
They ate humble pie on that.
And even the IMF, how much I've given you, maybe Evans.
The 3 billion as
no, listen to me again. The gap, the whole of Ghana is 10.5 billion US dollars. The IMF may provide some 3 billion, 1 billion from the bilateral or multilateral partners, 6.5 billion or at least 4.6 billion is expected from commercial creditors. Let that happen first before you talk about an IMF approval. IMF board meeting in March. I'm not even aware that they have a meeting in March.
No, I mean, they're expecting
and I say,
that they will get the executive board approval.
No, let alone expecting that the executive board of IMF will meet in March. I'm not aware.
So you don't share in that optimism that they'll strike an executive board approval by March?
Optimism for Ghana for an IMF executive board approval contingent on the success of the domestic bond
debt exchange program.
Debt exchange program and external creditors will be July, not March.
That's mid-year.
Probably. So I won't say June. I say July.
But they've already struck a deal with the banks. They
That
are
is
more than
not
halfway
enough.
there.
The banks.
They need 80%.
We've met with stakeholders. The insurance companies have investment of up to 4.6 billion. They employ about 13,000 persons whose job is at risk, and the way government is telling them to deal with it. One of the concerns I picked up from some of the stakeholders, like the banks, was that maybe instead of this 7% or 7.5%, give us 10%. We'll trade off profitability, but sustain us into the industry. One of the nagging issues, you write on it, has been resolved, which is that the Republic doesn't have the sovereign right unilaterally to change the terms of this bond. You know already, even before reaching out to the banks and the insurance company, they had already issued their own debt exchange details. Who does that? You should have consulted them, and it is not all the issues which have been resolved satisfactorily. So don't think that with these unsatisfactory expectations, you have a deal. When you close it, the crisis may still linger on.
Yeah, let's end in a couple of minutes now with your own party. This year is going to be a very important year for you. Your seat is another up for primaries. Is anybody contesting you in your constituency?
Oh, it's a democratic party. At least Evans.
Tell me something. Anytime I've been to the northern region, and this is me as a head of political desk, and I've hosted you many in your own constituency, there are many people who say you are the kingmaker in the entire northern region.
Oh, no.
And nobody dare
even
moot the idea of contesting you.
Oh, no.
Is that true? That even other constituencies, if you want to stand there, you need Haruna's approval.
Evans, I'm completing my 5th term service to the country, public service, 20 years standing if I get this done. I've had the rare privilege.
20 years?
Yes. At
the end of this particular term?
Yes. If I complete this, I would have done 20 years in Parliament. I've had the rare privilege to serve the Republic as Minister for Communications. My footprints are there.
Employment.
Minister for Trade and Industry, my footprints are there. Minister for Employment, my footprints are there. Even as minority leader, you may like or dislike Haruna. At least I got a speaker elected. I got a budget rejected and installed. I got a Japan rejected. I got a debt exchange which is still struggling to be approved in service of the people. In the northern region, that's not a pleasant description of me.
Is it not?
It's a democratic party. At least what I like about the NDC, we've become more democratic. And the party have become more resourceful. And its resourcefulness reflects in its human resources. Democratic because we've gone past those days where they were in positions of candidates, evaluation of candidates. Now you are subjected to competitive democratic primaries. The presidential candidate will be subjected to that. Parliamentary candidates will be subjected to that. The Tamale South seat is free, it's open. When nominations open, you can come in. The only thing I can assure you is that you won't get more than 5% of the vote, or probably 2%.
Here we go.
Some 95%.
So that's a warning to anybody who is harboring the thought.
No, he won't make more than 5%.
But that
I still have the trust and confidence
of the people in that region. And then the big header will be the presidential primary. You expect that to also be democratic. There are many who believe that the party is conspired to give it to John Mahama.
No, not at all. You see, Evans, President Nana Addo Dankwa and his failings have made President Mahama more credible and a good credible candidate to market. Everything he cautioned against, which this government said we will do, they have done it to failure. So it's important that the Ghanaian people appreciate. I mean, you are talking about corruption. Look at the COVID report.
Did I just say you endorse John Mahama?
I have no hesitation doing that if I have to, because I essentially will vote him, and my constituency will stand strongly. But the national chairman have to their lifelong investment and saving. It's distressing to hear what is contained in a domestic debt exchange, and it's distressing even for external creditors to hear that a sovereign state of Ghana will treat them the way we are treating them. How did we get here? Couldn't we have prevented it? Couldn't we have avoided it? But I think that the president must engage, and he must engage in a manner that he keeps the country together. I mean, forget of announcing success of that exchange. The consequence is grave, and persons are likely to die much more quietly in Ghana, arising out of frustration and disappointment if we do not manage these negotiations well. So to begin with, Evans, it is wrong today, wrong yesterday, and wrong tomorrow for the Minister of Finance to have announced this debt exchange program without engaging the stakeholders in a prior engagement.
And that is
that is legally and constitutionally wrong for him to usurp the mandate.
We look forward to this parliament once it resumes, and as from everything you've said, we expect this.
But I wish that as minority leader, they would have allowed me to do an assessment of some of my MPs. Some I need, and I need to keep them. So you see how democratic we are.
As in your primaries?
No, okay. As minority leader, I should have a fair assessment of some of the MPs that the party necessarily must consider returning to parliament.
Oh, as in your primaries?
Absolutely. Okay, because this work is about experience.
Any of them you have in mind that you could talk about?
I have several. Nelson Dafemepo, Teddy, who has won Ayansuano for long, he didn't. And I may end up mentioning, I mean, as minority leader, my first loyalty is to incumbent. I support every incumbent who wants to return back to parliament.
But the principle
save in a situation where he's so unpopular that the constituents are not likely to accept him. And then there's a category that the party must look at. How can President Mahama win a constituency by 6,000 votes different? Then the MP survives with 23 or 230 votes. It means the MP is not as popular as he ought to be.
But you believe some MPs, the party must do what they can to retain them to
parliament? The late Cleanso, who used to do some brilliant work for the party when he was alive, he used to call them marginal to win, marginal to lose, safe and skilled. I'm sure that the party will engage some brains to do an assessment. But we are a democratic party. The only thing we need to check is the monetization again, which has become one of the gravest threats to our democracy. Okay. MPship and constituencies going to the highest bidder, not good. It doesn't bode well for the future of our democracy.
Mr. Drisu, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.